Lakewood Church brings in $90 million every year. But here's what happens when 20,000 members walk out the door. They take $18 million with them. The electric bill for a 16,000-seat arena doesn't get smaller. The 368 staff members still need paychecks. The television broadcasts still cost millions to produce. And this is what a financial death spiral looks like. The same prosperity gospel that built Joel Osteen's empire contains the exact mathematical flaw that will tear it apart. Most people look at a megachurch and see a religious organization. Accountants look at a megachurch and see a business with horrifying overhead costs and an entirely voluntary revenue stream.
When those two perspectives collide, the accountants are always right, eventually.
To understand why Lakewood Church is bleeding money, you first need to understand how the machine was built to run. Megachurches operate on a model that looks nothing like your local congregation. Lakewood isn't a church in the traditional sense. It's a media company, a real estate operation, and a touring entertainment business that happens to be tax-exempt. The revenue streams break down into 4 major categories. First, tithes and offerings from weekly attendees. This is the foundation, roughly 60 to 70% of annual revenue. Second, book sales and licensing deals. Joel Osteen has sold over 15 million copies of his books, and his publisher pays him advances in the millions. Third, television ministry donations. Viewers who never set foot in Houston send checks after watching broadcasts on networks that reach 100 countries. Fourth, touring events and arena appearances. Joel fills stadiums across America at $30 to $50 per ticket, with VIP packages running into the hundreds. Now here's the critical detail that most people miss. Joel Osteen doesn't take a salary from Lakewood Church. He hasn't since 2005. His personal income comes almost entirely from book royalties and speaking fees. This means Joel Osteen, the individual, is financially separated from Lakewood Church, the institution. Remember this. It becomes important later. The machine ran beautifully for 2 decades. At its peak, Lakewood claimed 50,000 weekly attendees.
The former Compaq Center, which they purchased for $105 million, was packed to capacity. Multiple services every weekend, standing room only. But something changed. Walk into Lakewood Church today and count the empty sections. The upper decks that used to overflow now sit roped off. The balconies that required overflow rooms now have scattered attendance. Independent observers tracking Lakewood's Sunday services have documented what the church won't officially confirm. Attendance has dropped somewhere between 15% and 30% over the past 5 years. Conservative estimates put the current weekly attendance around 35,000 to 40,000. That's a loss of 10,000 to 15,000 regular givers. And here's where the math turns brutal. The average megachurch tithe is around $1,800 per year per giving household.
When you lose 15,000 members, you don't lose 15,000 times 1,800. You lose the high-capacity givers who were subsidizing everyone else. Wealthy donors who wrote 5-figure checks, business owners who gave from their corporate accounts. These aren't the people who stick around when controversy hits. They're the first to quietly redirect their giving elsewhere. Industry analysts estimate Lakewood has lost somewhere between $12 and $20 million in annual giving capacity. But here's the problem. The costs don't shrink when the givers leave. Lakewood's fixed operating costs are staggering.
The former Compaq Center requires year-round climate control, security, maintenance, and insurance. We're talking about a facility built to host professional basketball games and major concerts. The utility costs alone run into the millions annually. Then there's the staff. 368 employees as of recent filings. Pastors, administrators, production crew, maintenance workers, security personnel, children's ministry staff. Even if you cut 10% of workforce, you've saved maybe $2 million, while devastating morale and operational capacity. Television production costs between $8 and $15 million annually. Studio equipment, satellite time, production staff, post-production editing. This is a broadcast operation competing with actual television networks. And unlike Netflix, they can't just raise subscription prices when revenue falls. This creates what economists call a death spiral. It's a term that sounds dramatic until you watch it happen in real time. When revenue drops but fixed costs remain stable, you have three options. Option 1, cut services and quality. But this drives away more members, which cuts revenue further. The remaining members notice the decline and start looking for alternatives. Option 2, liquidate assets. But selling property signals desperation, which drives away more members and kills any remaining confidence in leadership. Option 3, take on debt. But debt requires interest payments, which increases fixed costs, which accelerates the spiral. There is no option 4. There is no prosperity gospel solution to a balance sheet problem. We've seen this exact pattern before, twice, and both times the ending was identical. In 1980, Robert Schuller's Crystal Cathedral was the most famous megachurch in America. The building cost over $18 million to construct. It was an architectural marvel, covered in over 10,000 windows. At its peak, the Hour of Power broadcast reached millions of homes. Schuller was the Joel Osteen of his generation. Then, attendance began declining in the early 2000s. Fixed costs stayed the same. Revenue dropped. By 2010, the Crystal Cathedral filed for bankruptcy with $50 million in debt. They sold the building to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange for $57 million. The ministry that spent decades preaching prosperity couldn't afford to keep the lights on. The parallels to Lakewood are uncomfortable. And then there's Jim Bakker and Heritage USA. In the 1980s, Baker built a Christian theme park and resort complex in South Carolina. 2,500 acres. Hotels, water parks, television studios. At its peak, Heritage USA was the third most visited theme park in America, behind only Disney World and Disneyland. 6 million visitors annually, revenue exceeding $100 million. Then, the scandals hit. Attendance dropped, but the theme park still needed maintenance. The hotels still needed staff. The television network still needed funding. Within 2 years, Heritage USA collapsed into bankruptcy. The property sold for a fraction of its construction cost. Jim Bakker went to prison. The ministry ceased to exist. The pattern is always identical. Build expensive infrastructure during boom times. Assume the boom will never end. When attendance drops, discover that empty seats cost almost as much as full ones. Spiral into debt trying to maintain appearances. Collapse. So where does this leave Joel Osteen personally? Here's the detail that should make Lakewood's donors uncomfortable. Joel's wealth exists almost entirely outside the church's financial structure. His estimated net worth of $100 million comes from book deals, speaking fees, and personal investments. When Lakewood Church eventually faces its reckoning, Joel Osteen will not be affected. His mansion isn't owned by the church. His book royalties don't depend on Sunday attendance. His speaking fees are paid by event organizers, not by Lakewood's operating budget. The prosperity preacher structured his finances so that he prospers regardless of what happens to his church. The congregation that funded his rise to fame, that bought his books, that told their friends to watch his broadcasts, that made him one of the most recognized religious figures in America.
They're the ones holding the bag when the music stops. And the music is slowing down. Lakewood Church sits in a building designed for professional sports, in a city with rising commercial real estate costs, with a television ministry that reaches fewer households every year as cable viewership collapses, with a donor base that skews older and isn't being replaced by younger members at anywhere near the same rate. The math doesn't care about faith. The math doesn't care about good intentions. The math just keeps running until the numbers don't work anymore. Joel Osteen spent 30 years telling people that God wants them to prosper, that faith produces abundance, that obedience leads to blessing. He built a machine that generates $90 million a year on the promise that prosperity follows belief. And now that machine is teaching a different lesson. The same prosperity gospel that filled the seats contains no instructions for what happens when the seats start emptying. The theology of abundance has no chapter on decline. The message that God rewards the faithful has no explanation for why faithful churches still go bankrupt. Crystal Cathedral's donors thought they were funding God's work until they discovered they were funding unsustainable debt. Heritage USA's supporters thought they were building the kingdom until they discovered they were building a collapsing theme park. And Lakewood's congregation thinks they're supporting a ministry until they discover they were supporting a media company that can't balance its books. Joel Osteen will be fine. His $100 million is safely separated from whatever happens to the institution he built. But the church named Lakewood, the building that used to host the Houston Rockets, the 368 employees who depend on those paychecks, they're caught in a mathematical reality that no amount of positive thinking can change. When 20% of your donors leave, you don't lose 20% of your revenue. You lose the 20% who were carrying the other 80. And the costs of running a 16,000-seat arena don't care how many seats are empty. The air conditioning runs whether there are 5,000 people or 50,000. The insurance premiums don't fluctuate with attendance. The mortgage payments come due every single month. This is the mathematical reality hiding behind the smiling pastor and the inspirational messages. Lakewood Church isn't dying because Joel Osteen is a bad person. It's dying because the business model contains a fatal flaw that no amount of faith can fix. You cannot build permanent infrastructure on temporary enthusiasm. You cannot fund fixed costs with variable donations. And you cannot preach prosperity while quietly drowning in the same financial pressures that destroy any other over-leveraged business. If you want to understand what happens when a prosperity gospel empire faces adversity, watch this video next. The numbers get worse.